Hello and welcome to Discernment Now. My name is Rich Van Every. I'm here with Kevin Anthony, and we are here to really continue this epic discernment conversation. And it is a never-ending journey, let me tell you.
Well, it's been a while since we've done an episode, and lots of stuff has happened. So some of the stories we're going to talk about may be a little old as far as trending news goes, but there are still important lessons to be learned.
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember here is there's a lot of distracting going on, and certainly it's good to be aware, but discernment of what to focus on and what not is really kind of one of the priorities of our intent here. Would you say, Kev? What is it that we are really trying to get to help people today?
Well, we didn't name it Discernment Now for nothing. So the idea, as always, is to be able to see through the news stories and figure out what is actually going on. So why don't we just start with the first one?
Yeah.
This one does go back a couple of weeks now, but Hunter Biden did plead guilty to failing to pay his taxes. He was also being charged with a firearms charge, I guess. I don't know. I think it's a felony. I don't really recall at this point. It's been a while. Why is this important to talk about? Well, a couple of things. And now that we've had a few weeks since this happened, you'll understand a little bit better what we're talking about here, because these are the two basically softest charges they could possibly come up with against Hunter Biden. So if you recall, going back a few weeks, there was tons of stuff coming out about the Biden crime family and all the bribes and the treason and all that kind of stuff. Now, several years ago, when we first learned about the Hunter Biden laptop, we were expecting at least these charges to come out, and they never did. The only time they finally charged him with these sort of low-level things is because the really big level evidence was coming out to show the big level crimes. And so what's important here as far as discernment is concerned is that you can see the only reason why they charged Hunter Biden with anything was so they could say, look, see, we really did go after Hunter Biden and blah, blah, blah. And by the way, pay no attention to Joe Biden. He had nothing to do with any of this. It's all just Hunter's fault, and it's a couple of minor things, and we'll just, wipe it under the rug. So if you don't believe that that's true, keep in mind that the tax charge is nowhere near what it should be as far as how much money they illegally took in, which they have bank records to prove. You can go listen to James Comer. He's given numerous press conferences on how many bribes they have found. First it was one $5 million bribe, then it was two $5 million bribes. Now we're looking at tens of millions of dollars in bribes, and they have bank records to prove all of this.
Yeah, and just to be clear, let's just not downplay any of this in a sense, right? It sounds like it's a bunch of money laundering fiasco activity, and it could be very well considered treason.
Well, it is treason.
Yeah,
it's treason because you're taking money from a foreign government so that you will actually do things that are not in the best interest of your country, but in the best interest of their country. That literally is treason.
Yeah. So if you want to beat a pillow, it's perfectly understandable because he should be in jail for life, but instead they're just making up basically the most minor charge he could get just to say, hey, we did something.
Right. And so let's look at the second charge, which is the firearms charge. With that one, they did something called a pretrial deferment. I forget the exact term because, again, this happened a couple of weeks ago. But basically what it means is he's not even going to go to trial. They're just going to bypass all that and they do some counseling, blah, 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 whatever. And that's just going to get completely swept under the rug.
Yeah.
If that gun charge was anybody other than Hunter Biden, anybody.
Yeah.
And I'm not even talking about Trump. I'm talking about you watching this video.
Yeah.
If you got caught with an illegal firearm as somebody, so here's the deal, by the way, if you're not aware. Hunter Biden is a prohibited person because he is a convicted drug addict. So he's not allowed to own a firearm, and the firearm he had wasn't a legal firearm. So that's the charges against him. If that were anybody else, mandatory prison time. You would be going to prison for a long time. But Hunter Biden, no, he just gets a pre-trial, we'll just,
Yeah, and still probably has his unauthorized firearm.
Oh, I'm
Or
sure
at
he's
least-
got
or
plenty
at least
of them.
another one. Still, packing.
So,
yeah.
interestingly enough, now, I mentioned at the beginning of this segment that, the fact that we've had some time since these charges came out gives us a little bit more perspective now, in a sense that, what have you heard
Crickets.
since that was announced?
Crickets. Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. So here's the discernment part. Number one, they announced those charges at a very specific time, and that was to distract you from all of the evidence that the House committee was finding on the Biden crime family.
Yeah.
So that was look over here, right?
Yeah.
Once they got that out of the news cycle, you haven't heard anything else about it. Do you really think anything's going to happen to Hunter Biden as a result of these things? Absolutely not. So you have one, a distraction, and two, further proof that we have a two-tier justice system. That the justice that is applied to you is not the same justice that is applied to people like Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and those people.
Yeah.
Now imagine if that were Eric Trump.
Right. Oh, they would have fun with that one.
They would have raided his home. They would have arrested him immediately, and he'd be sitting in jail all of this time waiting for a trial to happen.
Yeah.
But instead, where's Hunter Biden?
Right.
Hunter Biden is at the the press correspondence dinner, showing up and rubbing elbows with all the press people and wealthy elites of the world.
Oh my gosh. Well, that video that was circulating of him like nervously like making some looking very high gestures, because there was which is another one of our stories we're going to get into, is some cocaine was found at the White House and we're suspecting it could have been his, but we don't really know. But
as much as I want to talk about this story, I want to wait a little bit to later in the episode.
Okay.
We'll come back to Hunter Biden.
I thought it was a great transition.
Well, it is a great
done.
transition.
You're not done with the firearms.
Well,
all right.
No, I'm done with that, but I want to cover a couple of these other stories that I think are a little bit more important.
Okay.
So just in case we run a little long in this episode, we're going to save cocaine Whitehouse to the end of the show.
Well, I think the moral of the story so far is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We do have a two-tier justice system. That doesn't mean all hope is lost. And
well, no,
sometimes it feels
that,
like it, but just don't let the learned hopelessness set in too far.
All right. So this next story is in very much the same vein as the first one, even though it's a completely different story on a completely different topic. So what are we talking about? Well, you've probably all heard about the submarine that was lost. It was a private company where a bunch of wealthy people paid a lot of money to go on the submarine and dive down to the wreck of the Titanic.
Yeah.
And they lost contact with it. They didn't know what happened to it. And for a week in the media, there was just non-stop news coverage about this sub and where it could possibly be and what may have happened to it. And the search efforts continue. Well, we come to find out later on that the U.S. Navy knew almost immediately that the sub had imploded, because the U.S. Navy is monitoring the seas, and they got, I think on sonar, they got basically the signal that this thing had imploded. Like loud and clear, they were like, uh-oh. They sat on it for an entire week.
Yeah.
An entire week they sat on the story and just let the media run wild with, what happened? Will we recover the people?
Yeah.
Will they be saved? When they absolutely knew that these people were all dead and that this sub had imploded.
Yeah.
This happened also at the same time that yet more evidence against the Biden crime family was being uncovered.
Yeah.
What a coincidence.
Right. Yeah, that was a big week. And, they just drug it out like you just wouldn't believe. I mean, it was just...
Right. And so, again, you
just want to recognize those patterns in the future.
Right.
And keep an eye out for things like this, because, the sub thing, as much as it was a tragedy and blessing to those that lost friends or family, but I just didn't buy any of it for the sake of it being like the much of a saga as they created it to be.
Well, once you've been around for a while, you pretty quickly recognize the signs of a distraction. So we all pretty much knew that from day one, but not everybody does, right? And that's why it's important to talk about here. Because anytime you see a story like that being dragged out and they make a huge deal and a big spectacle out of it, you can bet they're distracting you from something. So our first two stories are really all about you being intentionally misled and distracted by the media so that you don't see all of the corruption and treason that's being uncovered, and you only focus on stories like submarines and, fake little charges that aren't going anywhere. All right.
What's next?
Let's talk next about the Supreme Court. We have actually gotten quite a few favorable rulings in the Supreme Court in these last few weeks. We're not going to talk about all of them today, but it is worth mentioning at least one of them. And what I really like about this and the other rulings that we've gotten are that they are actually returning us back to the Constitution. And so that's going to be the real point of this. So what am I talking about here? Well, the Supreme Court ended affirmative action. Now, a lot of people are freaking out over this, saying that this is the worst thing that has happened to black people in the history of the United States since slavery and all that. But let's
take a deep breath.
Let's pause for a moment and think about this.
Yeah.
The definition.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so ridiculous that sometimes I just shake my head. But when we talk about discrimination, right, the definition is literally, or I should say racism more specifically, the definition of racism is literally making decisions about somebody based on the color of their skin.
Right.
What is affirmative action?
Just that.
Affirmative action is deciding who gets a certain job or who gets into a college or university simply based on the color of their skin.
Yeah.
That is literally racism.
And this has been going on for a while. I remember a friend telling me, like, probably 8 years ago or more, that this was going on, and I just thought it was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard.
Yeah, I mean, affirmative action's been in place for decades.
You've got to be kidding me.
Right. And so,
it's like the racists calling other people
in their mind,
so
it's only racist if it's white people doing it to black people.
Okay.
But if it's black people doing it to white people or Asians, suddenly it's not racist. You can see how ridiculous that is. It is racist no matter who does it to who.
So because it's so illogical, it's merely a social engineering objective to divide and disrupt more so than actually have any sort of equality or any sort of fairness or any sort of balance in the workforce per se or the school system.
If I were to give them the benefit of the doubt, here's what I would say.
But that's what I'm saying. You shouldn't do that.
Well, I'm just saying if I were to give them the benefit of the doubt, what I would say is this, is that the average person thinks that the reason affirmative action was put into place was to make up for wrongs that were done to black people during segregation and when they weren't allowed to go to certain schools and they weren't allowed to have certain jobs. To some extent, I understand that. But again, it's the wrong way of going about solving a problem.
Right.
So rather than just saying, okay, we're just going to give you the job, we're just going to give you the spot in that particular school, you're not actually helping them, right? What you should do, the proper way to address that is say, okay, why couldn't you get that job? Why couldn't you get into that particular school? Well, it's because you probably didn't have the training or the education. You weren't allowed to go to the public schools that white people went to. Maybe you went to really poor inner city schools where you didn't learn, you didn't score well on your tests, stuff like that. So the way to actually handle that is to address the root of the issue, which is to say, let's fix the schools in the poor neighborhoods. Let's get better education in there. Let's get people getting better test scores so that they can actually apply and get these spots to these better schools based on merit, just like everybody else has to do.
Oh, but we have CIA operations feeding drugs into these communities. And, honestly, it's true. I think a lot of it is the broken family. I think it's, so many kids growing up without a father figure that's, got his marbles intact. and really being a role model because you don't want to rely on the school system to raise your child or to educate them fully. Parents need to be engaged and involved, and this is part of their objective here, I feel like, because this is a long-term goal plan. This isn't just kind of a bunch of random instances occurring. This is really a systematic approach to dilute the family structure, to create inequality or these sort of things, because the whole as much as there's a sliver of truth with white privilege, they've taken it and just blown it way out of proportion, I think.
I actually don't believe there's any truth to white privilege. I honestly don't. Because
I would say you could make it. There's a sliver of an argument to be had there, perhaps. Like it's
there
something
are
that you could.
Ton of poor, broke ass,
absolutely,
uneducated, dumbass white people.
Nothing absolute, but just like
lots of them.
But it really comes back to I think mentorship and upbringing and the society or the community that you're in, and how. Because just like there's no more rites of passage for young men, right? So
so you're spanning a lot of different topics.
But I want to give a picture here that it's a combination of things and not just the idea of your skin color. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Well, it is a lot of things, and really what it comes down to is socioeconomic status. Like I said, there's plenty of poor white people who didn't have any of the opportunities either.
Right.
It had nothing to do with the fact that they were white. It's just that their socioeconomic status was low, right? So then the question is, how can we fix that? How can we create a society where everybody has equal opportunity, not equal outcome, equal opportunity? We all have the opportunity to do the same stuff, right? But not necessarily the same outcome. So I just wanted to read something here from the Supreme Court, which is, many universities have concluded wrongly that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. Our constitutional history does not tolerate that choice. And that was written by Justice Roberts. Justice Clarence Thomas, who everyone knows is black, wrote in his concurring opinion that affirmative action policies fly in the face of the colorblind Constitution and our nation's equality ideal. And they're absolutely right. So for all you people out there complaining about this ruling and thinking it's terrible, it is not terrible. It is fixing something that should have been adjusted. Now, do I wish that they would do all those things that you and I were just talking about as well to solve the underlying problem? Yes, I do. That, however, is not the court's job. So you can't be mad at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has only one job, to interpret laws based on the Constitution. So all they do, they don't make laws. That's not their job, right? That's the legislative branch of government. All the Supreme Court does is when someone challenges a law and it makes its way up to the Supreme Court looks at that law and says, is this in line with the Constitution, which is the guiding document of the government of the country? Yes, okay, it stands. No, it falls. That is their only job. And until recently, they were doing a terrible job of this. Absolutely terrible job. But now they're actually starting to move back towards the Constitution. And unfortunately, too many people, they want this nanny state government to fix everything by just, creating simple laws that will somehow magically even the playing field for everyone. It doesn't work like that. Those are temporary things, and they have consequences. Usually pretty harsh unintended consequences, as did this particular affirmative action policy.
Right.
There is no escaping the hard work that it takes to fix these problems. But there are solutions. They just take more work and they take more time. But if you were to actually implement them, you would actually solve the problem rather than putting a Band-Aid on it that creates further problems down the road.
Right. And it all starts with the conversation. So, being educated, talking about some of the contentious issues that we all face is just step one of heading in that direction, getting involved in your local government, getting involved in any sort of group that's going to help to encourage spreading this knowledge, and just understanding whenever you do hear people talk about the Constitution being out the window, that it's just not true, and that we're going to live free and die free until.
Well, they're trying to make
really
it out
over.
the window. Then they've been doing a damn good job for decades now.
I mean, I'm not saying it isn't eroded and it hasn't been compromised.
We're pulling it back in the window little by little here,
Yeah.
and we don't have time to go into all the other Supreme Court decisions, but
right.
I just wanted to use one of the recent decisions to demonstrate the point of moving back towards the Constitution. Because we could talk about all of them. They're all actually really interesting cases, and they're all unique in their own way in what they say. But the point here is that too many people in this country don't understand the Constitution anymore. They don't understand what it is, why it's important, or how it works. And so when government lies to them, when corrupt judges rule against the Constitution, people just go along with it and they believe it because they go, oh yeah, well the judge said this. It doesn't matter what a judge says. A judge does not have the power to change the Constitution.
Right.
Right. So
that's up to us then to know the Constitution better and
absolutely.
the Bill of Rights and to, stand up for what's right. At least speak out about it.
You've probably heard the saying, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for everything.
Yeah.
Right? And this is a great example of that because the Constitution is the framework that the entire republic is based on. So if you allow that to fall, even if it's just piece by piece, then you're going to fall for everything because you're not standing for the principles that are behind the document. The document outlines a set of principles, right? And if you let those principles fall, your entire society is going to be eroded away. And that's exactly what we've watched happen.
Yeah. And it really is an extraordinary document that stood the test of time, unlike so many other, governments. And as much as, there's been a lot of, sad stories and things to, say about our history, overall, we've been incredibly blessed.
It's an imperfect document, but it's the best one that's been written to date in this world.
Yeah. So just know that.
Yeah. All right. Since we're talking about the Supreme Court, let's just talk about one other Supreme Court case that came up. Actually, this one wasn't Supreme Court, I don't believe. This was, I think, a lower level judge. But anyway, a judge has issued an injunction to protect free speech on social media platforms. So the Biden administration was basically saying that, we should have the ability to work with these social media companies to censor.
Yeah.
That's basically what they said.
Yeah.
And a judge disagreed with them and said, no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
The government cannot work in collusion with private companies to censor free speech. That is literally against the First Amendment. It is unconstitutional. All right, there's a second piece to this story, though. Okay, great. So a judge did that. After that decision came down, can you believe the Biden White House had the cojones to appeal that decision? They were shot down, by the way, but they literally said, not only do we not care that we tried to do something that was unconstitutional, but we're going to double down on that and go doubly unconstitutional.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
Talk about corruption at the highest level you can possibly think of.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see because obviously, the judge had ordered that the government stop colluding in this way.
Oh, they won't. Honestly, they're not. They're not going to do it.
They're not going to do it.
And by the way, if you don't think that was actually happening, we have, of course, all the Twitter files, but we also have lots of other emails too showing that they were having conversations back and forth with all of the major social media platforms. And the government was saying, we want you to ban this account, ban this person, censor this particular story, whatever it is. So we know for a fact they were doing it. And they wanted to basically codify that and make it legal, and they were shot down. Yeah. So,
and if you're upset, it's okay. You should be. Like there's really, this isn't just
you should
about
be upset. You should be upset your government tried to do that to you.
Absolutely, because this is interference of our voting system. This is poisoning our children. This is doing so many things that are just not okay.
This is Yuri Bezmenov in the 80s giving an interview saying that communism is going to take over the West, and that it has been accomplished once the people can't make heads or tails of anything.
Yeah,
because they're so damn confused.
That's right,
and that's what a lot of this censorship has to do with. Because they're not just censoring, but they're also running propaganda in conjunction with that, right? And so everything gets so confused, nobody can tell what's what.
One of my favorite latest quotes is that was in a meme is in a world of conspiracy, in a world of propaganda, the truth is always a conspiracy.
Well, of course. Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
discern that, will you?
All right, let's get to the story you really wanted to get to in this episode. All right.
Little satchel of cocaine.
Cocaine found in the White House.
Oh, how did it get through security, they ask?
Well,
I mean, give me a break.
So
like, really, are they searching for that? Are they really they're frisking people?
They are, actually.
No, they're really concerned about it.
No. So here's what you have to understand about the White House. There are different levels of security based on who you are. Not everybody goes through the same level of security. So as the White House was trying to explain this away and say that it was a visitor to the White House or say that it was a construction worker because they were remodeling, those people all go through extremely tight security, including machines that can scan you and literally detect if you are carrying drugs. There is no way that somebody got that into the White House. Now, another thing you might notice is the White House changed the story multiple times. First, it was found in this part of the White House. Then it was found in another part of the White House. And then it was found somewhere else in the White House, right? They kept changing the location because they kept realizing that they couldn't explain it away based on some of the initial reports of where it was found, because nobody has access to those parts of the White House except the first family and other high level. Some of these places in the White House, Secret Service doesn't even have access to. They do, but only if they have a special pass and only at a time when they're supposed to be there. So in other words, if there's an event in that particular part of the White House and they need Secret Service, the agents assigned to that will get a special pass, and then they can go be in that area. And once that event is over, they have to leave. They give the special pass back. They're not allowed back in there. So there are areas in the White House nobody else can go into. So that's why they kept changing the story about where it was actually found, because the reality is this. Where this cocaine was found and when it was found means that only somebody on the inside, meaning a high-level advisor or a family member, could have possibly left it there. Now, we also know that a particular family member happened to be there on Friday, and if I recall correctly, they discovered it on like a Sunday or something like that. Okay. If you think, you got to put your investigator cap on here.
Yeah.
You got to think like an investigator. As an investigator, you think about who are the likely suspects, who would have access to this, who would have motive, who do you know that can go in and out of the White House and bypass, the higher levels of security, who do you know who maybe might have had a cocaine addiction in the past, right? All right, people, look. The first person you have to look at here is Hunter Biden. He has a proven past with cocaine addiction. He also is one of the only people that can access some of these areas of the White House. Don't tell me that he's not a suspect. That is the most absurd thing I have ever heard. Yeah. Now, does that mean he's the one that did it? No, but he would be, as Dan Bongino often says, that sounds like something we call a clue. He would be, of course, your first suspect. Now, the Secret Service recently came out and said that they have no suspects and they're closing the investigation.
Oh, so convenient.
This is the most ridiculous thing. Now, there are a lot of retired and former Secret Service agents who are absolutely livid about this because they know, just like we know, the Secret Service knows damn well who that cocaine belongs to.
Yeah.
And they won't say it.
Yeah.
That is sad because that means that the Secret Service now has political motivations and that they've been corrupted, just like pretty much every other. I don't think they're quite at the level of an FBI or a Justice Department, but it's obvious that they are hiding this for political purposes, and that is disheartening because it just means yet another government agency that's corrupt. So, so this show is Discernment Now.
Yeah. This
is all about discernment. When you hear stories like this, like, oh, it must have been a construction worker, or, oh, it could have been anybody. There's parts where, they do tours in and out, blah, blah, blah. oh, don't know, it couldn't possibly have been Hunter Biden. You have to look past that and really dig into the facts. If you wait a couple of days after one of these stories comes out, you'll start to see actual facts come in. You'll start to see former Secret Service agents come out and say, okay, look, I worked on this detail. Here's how it works. What they just told you is not possible. And many of them have said that already. They've come out and said, there's no way that story that Karine Jean-Pierre just told you could possibly be true.
Yeah, which is a good indication that it's a real story, right? Because this could have been potentially another decoy story. Could have been another a hype thing that no justice is ever served. Nothing's ever really done about it. It was just a bunch of hot air fluff and distraction. It was pretty exciting. It had some baity things. So if there weren't certain elements of it that made it, like you were saying, like where the dots were not connecting, or they had clearly set up a story that was a little cleaner to skate around.
I don't think they set this one up.
No, I know.
And
I know they didn't.
That's
what I'm saying. It's important to be able to recognize when they may have or not. And
right.
we were seeing signs in this story that this was not a setup story.
No, I don't think this one was used as a distraction or a setup. I think it actually happened. Mm-hmm. And I think they were like, oh, crap. How do we make this go away as quickly as we possibly can? That's where I think this story fits in. So,
yeah.
So, yeah, those are our top stories. I know you wanted to do a couple of shout-outs for some honorable mentions.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I just think that there has been some incredible debating and skepticism going around the Sound of Freedom film, which is out in theaters now and #1 in the box office, which is amazing because I do believe this is a very real issue and an important one at that. And of course, this is just meant to be step one into the subject matter for a lot of people. It's quite disheartening and uncomfortable. And I think the biggest piece about it is what apparently Greg Reese from InfoWars reported on, is that the organizations through the website that are very well established fighting this problem nationally and globally are not in the purest form. And there's some people behind them that are very questionable and suspect. So the film itself, I believe, is sound. The people behind it, I believe, are sound. But the fundraising effort is questionable.
Well, I've heard a lot of criticism about this movie in a lot of different ways. From people who are like, it didn't go far enough. It didn't show the real extent of the problem. It didn't go into how high up the food chain it goes.
It's too much.
But keep in mind that this is not a movie that's directed towards people who've been researching this for decades. It's intended to present it to people who have no idea that this is actually happening. So I think that's probably about the right level.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of people that do good research and consider themselves truthers start digging into, like you said, the organizations behind it and funding and starting to make all these connections and ties. And some good people that I trust are really like, this is all corruption. This is all just, the pedophiles just putting this out to mislead you and distract you. I don't actually believe that. What I think is if you are involved in Hollywood in any way, shape, or form, through 6 degrees of separation, you will always be able to draw some lines back because Hollywood is a corrupt cesspool. Let's just be honest, right?
Yeah.
You can't get anything done in Hollywood without dealing with some shady people.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it is. I can't tell you 100% that The Sound of Freedom is on the up and up. I don't know if it is or not. But I do know that anything that raises awareness on this subject is a good thing. Mm-hmm. So I would not allow yourself to get sucked into all the negativity around it. And I think that we should support more films like this because we're likely to see smaller independent film companies that maybe have less corruption and less ties to the Hollywood cesspool. And maybe we'll get some more decent films out there.
Yeah.
They apparently made this film 5 years ago, and they ran into obstruction after obstruction, mm-hmm. And nobody would ever release it. So they finally literally had to buy the rights out in order to make it happen, and it took them 5 years to get the thing. Now, that is not usual. In fact, most of the time, if you made a movie and you couldn't get it out there within 5 years, your company would go bankrupt, you'd lose everything, and nobody would ever see it, right? So,
It's a deep, wild scenario here, but I think ultimately, this is a gateway film for other people to wake up about many other issues, and that's really important.
Yeah. I would also say from a discernment point of view, if you looked at the headlines surrounding this film,
right.
all the major media were just trashing it. Every single one of them, they got the memo. They got the 4 a.m. talking point memo.
QAnon.
It's a QAnon conspiracy film.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with QAnon. And I'm assuming that, people watching this show are savvy enough to understand there is no such thing as QAnon. There is Q, and then there were Anons. So Q was a person or persons that may or may not have been associated with the Trump administration and military intelligence, who were giving information via forums and chats. And then there were just people on those forums taking that information and researching it and trying to figure out, is this real? Is this not real? Is this true? Is this not true? How far down these rabbit holes, can we go? And that's all Q and the Anons ever were, but there's no such thing as QAnon. So when you see a headline saying, this is a QAnon, blah, 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 instantly you know that it's fake.
Yeah.
So the media figured out a long time ago that if they just labeled anything QAnon, they could basically just dismiss it. Right? And they do the same thing with the label QAnon that they've done with conspiracy theory or conspiracy theorist for a long time.
Yeah.
They don't like what you're saying. That person, you sir, are a conspiracy theorist, and that means you people out there should not listen to a word that this guy's got to say, right?
Yeah.
They do the same thing by labeling it QAnon. So another way of discerning is when you see all of the mainstream media trashing something, you can bet it's probably true and something you should be paying attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. And PragerU as well has a series now coming out on Tim Ballard and a whole nother story that was going on around the same time of that real life story that happened for Sound of Freedom. So support small independent media as much as you can, and continue to express your courage, because courage breeds courage. And that's what we need in the world, is more courageous people standing up for what's right, speaking up, and taking action, voting with their wallet, and just staying positive in the midst of all the overwhelm and chaos that we get to weed through. It's a lot to weed through.
Got anything else?
That'll do it.
That'll do it?
Yeah.
All right.
Have a great rest of your week. Thanks so much for watching.